Hello guys, so I'm just going to record this video to help you with your homework. I believe this is like one of the hardest questions in the book, and we're only going to spend one lesson on the role of finance, so it is important that we do this end of unit practice question. So the homework is due on the 5th of October, and it's simply a 7-mark question. Okay, you need to evaluate the importance of the finance function in supporting the planning at a business such as LP Limited, and it is 7 marks. Okay, so first off, you need to understand what the question is asking you. It's basically saying, is the finance function really important in making decisions, such as the decisions that LP are about to make, i.e., invest in a new drug factory to manufacture their drug, or should they license it out? So the question is saying, how important is the finance function in making these decisions, or are other departments much more important? Okay, so obviously they're bringing out a new drug. Is the finance department the most important thing in this planning stage, or would the marketing department be more important? Okay, at the end of the day, they've got to market and advertise the drugs, so they might be more important. So you've got to evaluate the importance. So you need to make a recommendation and a conclusion. Okay, I'm not going to read the case study out. You can read the case study. So reading the case study, I would really, if I were you, highlight some keywords. Okay, this is good practice. You should be doing it anyway, but just to remind you, highlight some keywords because you need to apply your answers to this particular case study. So obviously this is the sheet you're going to do the work on. So what I've done is, after you've highlighted the keywords, I've pulled out some of the things in this case study. There's quite a few things to talk about in your 7-mark answer. There's loads of information. So in terms of application, it should be fairly easy. All right. So LP Limited are doing all this sort of thing. So they are developing drugs. They need to trial the new drugs. As I said, they've got a decision whether to manufacture their own drugs, which means they have to buy a new factory, or they can license the drugs out, which is cheaper. And when it comes to advertising, they can advertise the new drugs online or using mail shots, or they can hire sales representatives. And as in the case that it says, it's the most effective way to market new drugs. However, hiring sales representatives are really, really expensive. So what finance will do is, remember, they do two things. They produce financial documents, and with those financial documents, they support business planning. All right. So they help make these decisions with financial documents as sort of evidence, as sort of a way to make this calculated risk. So when they develop drugs, it's obviously extremely expensive. So the finance department will set budgets. Okay, they will produce cash flows, like a cash flow forecast, to ensure the company is operational. Okay, and the range of sources of finance to make sure that the business can pay all their bills that they need to, without going under. Okay, so they can spend a few months minus, having less cash in than less cash out. But they can't sustain that over a long period of time. Okay, so when they develop drugs, it's a really, really big expense. So what finance will do will say, look, you're going to have what, say 10, 20, 30 million. Okay, that's all you've got to develop your drugs. Here's the cash flow forecast. This amount of money is going out to pay for these drugs. This is what the amount of money is coming in from the sale of other drugs. Okay, and they're going to work out whether it's viable to develop new drugs or not. If it's not, they're just going to continue selling their old drugs, as it were, until it becomes a viable option. All right. So, without the finance department, the business might start developing drugs and get themselves into trouble because they've spent way too much money doing this, because it is an extremely expensive and lengthy process. So, with the help of finance, they'll stick to budgets, have cash flows, detailing when cash goes in and out, so they don't overspend and waste their money developing drugs that won't return much capital. So once they develop drugs, they need to test it to see if it works. So again, this is an expensive and lengthy process. So finance will work out the costs involved, okay, by producing perhaps a profit and loss account or just do some costings for the business, okay, and they will raise finance to make this happen, okay. If it's going to cost 20, 30 million to trial the drugs, they will look for a way to get finance. They might get a bank loan, they might sell shares, they might use some owners' capital, they might even use crowdfunding, but they'll look at their options available and choose the most appropriate one. So LP Limited also have an option. Okay, so once they develop these drugs, they might license out these drugs, so they won't be producing it themselves. Other companies will produce it either for them or produce it themselves. So basically, they'll take LP's formula of the new drug, okay, and they'll make it and package it and sell it under their own name. So if LP Limited do this, okay, they do save money on building a new factory, so they don't need to build a new factory, so it's not going to be a massive cost. However, what finance will do is they'll work out the profit margins, which is going to be smaller, okay? So they're selling this to other drug companies to make, which means they're not going to make as much profit as they would if they sold direct to the public, okay? However, the production costs are much, much lower, okay? So the new drug company will only pay for the patent or the license to make these drugs. So LP won't actually have to pay for the production of goods, so they don't need raw materials, they don't need a factory, they don't need the capacity. However, they won't make as much as they would if they did manufacture their own drugs. Okay, so finance will also produce sales forecasts. Okay, so these are the financial documents they make, and they will suggest prices to license the drugs out for to make sure it is profitable for LP Limited. So in terms of advertising, okay, they can pick three options. They can send mail shots of new drugs. So basically, they just mail doctor surgeries, hospitals, like almost like a brochure, a leaflet of these new drugs. So, which means they can hit a lot of new doctors and surgeries and hospitals in one go nationwide. It is costly, but it's actually cheaper than obviously hiring sales representatives. Okay, so finance will here work out the costs again and whether it will be worthwhile by perhaps producing sales forecasts to see how much return they'll get for sending these mail shots out, and then the business will obviously see whether this is going to be the most profitable option for them. So the business can also manufacture their own drugs, which is going to be extremely expensive. So in the case study, they need to buy a new factory, which is going to be a massive outlay. Okay, but it is the most profitable way. Okay, because then they are in control of their the selling of the drugs, which means they'll make more profit as opposed to licensing out the drugs. So finance will work out how much the new factory will cost. They'll do some average rate of return because there might be a couple of sites the business is interested in, and the finance department will work out which site will produce the most drugs for the least cost in terms of production. They'll also work out the break even to see how many drugs are needed to be sold to cover all the costs. Again, this is another financial document, and whether it's going to be viable, if it's going to be possible to sell, I don't know, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million packets a year. Okay, they'll look at the market, they'll work with other departments, but they'll actually have a figure to work towards. So again, that's going to help the business make a sensible decision to see which is the most profitable route. Going back to advertising, they can advertise the new drugs online. They can do it through other websites, social media, which means finance will see how much it'll cost to advertise on these websites and whether they need to hire new employees, such as web designers, web programmers, to get this sorted. So again, they'll figure out how much it's going to cost and how much the return is going to be. Lastly, they can also market the drugs using sales representatives. So basically, people go to doctor surgeries and things like that. This is the most effective because hospitals will obviously respond much more better to someone selling them drugs in person than like a brochure or leaflet, which is what a mail shot is. Okay. So finance will again will work out the costs. Okay, how much is it going to cost to hire these new employees? The sales forecast is sales forecast projected, and then whether the return on the investment is going to be worthwhile. Okay, so finance will help LP Limited in loads of different ways to make these decisions. They'll produce the financial documents. That's the first thing they'll do. And with those financial documents, the business can then make a sensible decision to see which is the best option. All right. And the question is actually asking you whether how important is this role for LP Limited. You might say it is really important because without this financial data or evidence to rely on, they're not going to be able to make a sensible decision that they might actually end up losing money. Okay. Or you might go, well, it is important to have this, but when you're launching a new drug, the marketing department might run more, be more important because they actually have to persuade people to buy the new product. Okay. That can be your conclusion. So it's the success criteria, 2 marks for application. So you need to apply to the case study and talk about how finance would help with several things. So you go back to this slide. 2 marks for analysis. So how does this impact on the business? And 3 marks for valuation. Okay. So provide your own personal judgment and the conclusion where the finance is most important. Well, the finance function is the most important part in business planning. So here is some extra help because again, really hard question. Okay, I know some of you will struggle in previous years where I've taught this. This is one of the hardest questions in the book. Okay, but I'm trying to give you as much help as possible. So this is like an example answer where to start. This is certainly not 7 marks. If you wrote this will not be worth 7 marks. So let's just see where the marks come from. Okay, so the finance function will play a crucial part to the planning of the business at this stage. For example, they can calculate the cost of trialing the drugs to see if they're safe to sell, then using that cost to create an adaptive cost at which they will have to sell the drugs for as application. Okay, so you've got the knowledge in there, so how the finance function will actually help them, but you've got the application as well because they're talking about the drugs. So if finance was non-existent, LP Limited would pay the price for trials and then charge an estimated price of the drug, which may either be too low, meaning the business will not make enough profit, that's your analysis, to pay back the cost of the trials, or too expensive so that customers will be unwilling to buy it, making a loss due to a lack of sales. Okay, and then I've put there, that's a bit of a valuation as well. Okay, so you could start your 7 mark question with something like this. You need to get there and get another 4 marks, another mark for application, another mark for analysis, another 2 marks for valuation in your conclusion. Then you then say, I think the finance department is the most important or not the most important, and why. Okay, using your points from the previous argument. Okay, guys, hope this really helps you. Any questions or